What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 8 Sleepers and Studs.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to give you a sleeper pick and my favorite stud at each position.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, NFL Week 8, let's take a look at the quarterback position. My Week 8 quarterback stud is Ryan Tannehill from the Tennessee Titans playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have the 9th worst defense overall and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Ryan Tannehill has averaged 24 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 2.8 rush attempts per game. He scored 17, 34, and 30 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's going to be about 10% owned here, projected at 20.9 fantasy points here in Week 8. He's $6,800 DraftKings salary and $700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 53 points scored in this game, with the Tennessee Titans favored by 5.5. So Ryan Tannehill has been playing fantastic so far this season. He had a somewhat off game last game, so he's in a nice bounce back spot here in a high scoring game with a decent matchup in a game that should be within a touchdown. So I like Ryan Tannehill here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, my sleeper pick at the quarterback position is Kirk Cousins from the Minnesota Vikings playing the Green Bay Packers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins has averaged 17.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 1.8 rush attempts per game. He scored 30, 16, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's only going to be about 1% owned here, projected at 17.9 fantasy points here in Week 8, and he's $6,000 DraftKings salary and $1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51 points scored in this game, and they have the Minnesota Vikings trailing by 6. So I like that 30-point game that Kirk Cousins just put up last week, giving him some momentum coming into this week. And Dalvin Cook has been limited in practice, so it looks like it's going to be a passing game script. So I like Kirk Cousins here versus the Green Bay Packers. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. My running back stud for Week 8 is Kareem Hunt from the Cleveland Browns playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Kareem Hunt has averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 14.4 rush attempts per game and 3.1 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 33% owned here, projected at 20.9 fantasy points here in Week 8. He's $6,900 DraftKings salary and $1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Cleveland Browns favored by 2.5. That line is a little surprising to me. I would think the Las Vegas Raiders would be favored in this one, especially after the Cleveland Browns just lost Odell Beckham Jr. for the season. But Kareem Hunt has a fantastic matchup here. He should be in store for an increased workload with OBJ out. That's why his ownership has skyrocketed here. So I like Kareem Hunt here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, my sleeper pick at the running back position is Melvin Gordon from the Denver Broncos playing the LA Chargers, who have the 13th worst defense overall and they're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Melvin Gordon has averaged 16.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 16.4 rush attempts per game and 3.8 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 3% owned. He's on the field for 70% of the snaps, projected at 13 fantasy points here in week 8. He's $5,600 DraftKings salary and $1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 44.5 points scored in this game, with the Denver Broncos trailing by 3.5. So Melvin Gordon is the most talented offensive weapon that the Denver Broncos have on the field. He should get a ton of volume in this game. He scored 29 fantasy points 3 weeks ago. He took a week off, and he scored 14 fantasy points last week. So he's got some major upside. His salary is low, so I like Melvin Gordon here versus the LA Chargers.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. My wide receiver stud for NFL Week 8 is Devonte Adams from the Green Bay Packers playing the Minnesota Vikings, who have the second worst defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Devonte Adams has averaged 27.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.5 pass targets per game. He scored 48 and 12 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 16 and 10 pass targets. He's going to be about 21% owned, projected at 21.5 fantasy points here in week 8. He's $8,800 DraftKings salary and $300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51 points scored in this game, and they have the Packers favored by 6. So I think this game is going to be a shootout. Fantastic matchup for Devonte Adams. They have this game within a touchdown, so hopefully it doesn't get out of hand and it stays somewhat competitive. The ceiling on this guy is through the roof, so I like Devonte Adams here versus the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, and if you're looking for a deep sleeper pick at the wide receiver position, take a look at Donovan Peoples-Jones from the Cleveland Browns playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Now, Donovan Peoples-Jones scored 15 fantasy points last week off of 3 pass targets. They lost Odell Beckham Jr. for the season, so he's going to have an expanded role here in week 8. He's not even going to be 1% owned here, projected at 7.2 fantasy points here in week 8, and he's only $3,800 DraftKings salary and $1,400 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Browns favored by 2.5. So great matchup, competitive game. He'll get an opportunity here with Odell Beckham Jr. out and Jarvis Landry limited in practice. He should get a handful of targets. So I like Donovan Peoples-Jones here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. My week 8 tight end stud is Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the Cleveland Browns, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 13th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Darren Waller has averaged 15.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.2 pass targets per game. He scored 17, 16, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 9, 7, and 12 pass targets. So tons of volume, consistent production. He's going to be about 26% owned, projected at 14.6 fantasy points here in week 8. He's on the field for 92% of the snaps, and he's $5,600 DraftKings salary and $1,200 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Raiders trailing by 2.5. Again, that surprises me. I think the Raiders win this game, but Joe Burrow and the Cleveland Browns have been playing pretty good, so this should be a close, competitive game, a decent matchup. I just love the volume that Darren Waller's getting and the consistent production, so I like Darren Waller here versus the Cleveland Browns. As a side note, that Las Vegas Raiders and Cleveland Browns game is my favorite game to stack here in week 8. I've given you a few picks from that game in this video. I think you can play 3 or 4 guys from this game in the same lineup. Okay, my sleeper pick at the tight end position is Jimmy Graham from the Chicago Bears playing the New Orleans Saints, who have the 8th worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Jimmy Graham has averaged 10.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6 pass targets per game. He scored 8, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 6, 8, and 5 pass targets. He's not even going to be 1% owned here. He's on the field for 71% of the snaps, projected at 9.9 fantasy points here in week 8, and he's $4,600 DraftKings salary and $800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43.5 points scored in this game, with the Chicago Bears trailing by 4.5. So fantastic matchup, a passing game script. I like the volume that he's getting, so I like Jimmy Graham here versus the New Orleans Saints.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.